Undoubtedly, in this hectic pace of life, all of us have moments when we feel weary, as if we are carrying invisible burdens on our shoulders. It could be the pressure of work, worries about family, anxieties about the future, or even the sorrows and mistakes of the past that are not easy to express. These burdens continue to pile up, causing our shoulders to slump and our souls to rarely find peace. And amidst those moments of seeming loneliness and exhaustion, the invitation of Jesus Christ in the book of Matthew resounds with such gentleness, intimacy, and profound empathy. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." This is not a promise that all difficulties will instantly disappear, but rather a loving reassurance. He invites us to come, not to be judged, but to share our burdens with Him. The rest that the Lord offers is not just physical repose, but a deep peace within the soul, the feeling of being sheltered, understood, and given new strength to continue on. Coming to Him can sometimes be as simple as a moment of stillness, laying down every worry and trustfully surrendering. That rest is the very refuge that every soul seeks, as Saint Augustine once so deeply contemplated. "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." That invitation is ever present, like a warm and open embrace, waiting for anyone who feels weary on their journey to come and find support and healing. From that warm invitation, we realize that Jesus' words are not just a momentary comfort, but also a door that opens to countless profound philosophies of life. These are truths that have the power to soothe the soul, remove invisible chains, and guide us on the journey to find true peace. Each philosophy is like a torch, illuminating the hidden corners of our weariness and showing us the path to lay our burdens down, right at the feet of the Lord. Before we begin, we kindly invite you to take a moment to subscribe to our channel to help spread this valuable content to your family and friends. We thank you, and now we invite you to listen. Rest begins with acknowledging the burden. We cannot seek help while still pretending that we are fine. The first step towards serenity is to bravely face and admit, "Yes, I am tired. I am carrying a burden." This admission is not weakness, but the beginning of wisdom and the first act of humility. One late afternoon, Jesus saw James, a potter, sitting dejectedly beside his broken pots. He approached him and asked, "James, why do you look so troubled?" James sighed, trying to force a smile. "I am well, teacher. It was just an unproductive day." Jesus looked at his calloused hands and his heavy eyes, then said gently, "Your hands say that you have labored, but your eyes say you are carrying a worry heavier than all that clay. Do not be afraid to speak of your weariness. Only when you recognize the burden on your shoulders can I help you lift it." James burst into tears, confessing his fear of not having enough money to feed his family. The moment he spoke, the truth was the moment the burden in his heart began to lighten. 2. Peace is a journey, not a passive destination. The phrase "come to me" is active. It requires a movement, a step of faith. Peace does not simply fall upon us. It is the result of our decision to walk the path toward the source of peace, even if each step is hesitant and fearful. On the dusty road to Jericho, a woman named Leah had been following the crowd, listening to Jesus teach for many days. She carried a secret sorrow in her heart. The Apostle Andrew noticed this and said to Jesus, "Teacher, that woman just follows us silently. She asks for nothing." Jesus turned and looked at Leah with a loving gaze. He spoke loud enough for her to hear. "My daughter, Your journey has already been a prayer. The fact that you have set out to follow me shows your heart's longing for rest. You do not need to reach the destination to receive peace. Every step you take in faith toward me is already a part of that rest. Leah looked up, and for the first time in years, she felt hope. 3. The heaviest burdens are often invisible. Physical labor may end when night falls, but the burdens of the soul, anxiety, sin, pride, fear, follow us even into our sleep. These are the burdens that destroy a person the most, and they are also what the Lord wants to lift from us the most. Jesus and his apostles were passing through a marketplace. They saw a porter, drenched in sweat, straining to carry a large sack of grain. Not far away was a tax collector named Matthew, sitting in his booth with a scowl on his face, though he was doing no heavy labor. The apostle Peter said, "Teacher, look how that porter toils." Jesus replied, "Peter, that sack of grain will be set down when he reaches home. But look at Matthew. The burden of the world's contempt, the burden of his own inner turmoil, and the burden of his dishonest money are many times heavier than that sack of grain. I have come to lift away those very invisible burdens." A short time later, he called Matthew himself to follow him. 4. True rest is being strengthened, not escaping. "I will give you rest" does not mean that life will be free of challenges. It means that in the eye of the storm, we find a shelter to regain our strength, to be fitted with a new yoke, the yoke of love and grace, which is easier and lighter, so that we can face life with greater courage. A fisherman named Simon, before he was called Peter, returned after a fruitless night, his boat empty. Exhausted and discouraged, he threw his nets on the ground. Jesus came to him and said, "Come to me, and I will give you rest." Simon replied, "Rest? I have to mend my nets, and tomorrow I must go out to sea again. I have no time for rest." Jesus smiled. Rest does not mean you will never have to cast your nets again. But when you are with me, your soul will be at rest. Your nets will still tear, the sea will still have its storms, but you will no longer battle them alone. I will give you the strength to mend the nets and the joy to set sail again. That is true rest. 5. Sharing the burden is the beginning of healing. The invitation, "Come to me," is an invitation into a relationship. When we open our hearts and share our deepest burdens with one who is trustworthy, the healing process has already begun. Loneliness multiplies a burden, while sharing diminishes it. A Roman centurion, whose daughter was gravely ill, stood watching Jesus from a distance, his heart heavy but afraid to approach due to fear of being judged. Finally, his love for his child overcame his fear. He came, knelt, and said, "Lord, I am not worthy, but only say the word." Jesus helped him up and said, "Centurion, the very moment you decided to share your burden with me, your faith began its healing journey. A burden once spoken no longer has the power to suffocate the soul. Go now. Your daughter is healed." 6. Humility is the key that unlocks the door to peace. Only those who recognize their own powerlessness can reach out for help. The worldly wise, those who arrogantly believe they can solve everything themselves, will never come. They will carry their burdens forever. Humility is the key that opens the door to the Lord's rest. A learned teacher of the law came to question Jesus, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" He asked not to learn, but to test him. Jesus answered him with the law. Later, a sinful woman, not daring to speak a word, came quietly and washed his feet with her tears. Jesus said to his apostles, "That wise man came with the burden of his pride, so he left with that same burden. But this woman came with the burden of her sin and a broken, humble heart. Therefore she leaves with peace and forgiveness. The door to my rest is always open to humble souls." 7. The true source of peace is internal, independent of circumstances. The Lord does not promise to change our external circumstances, but He promises to grant a peace from within, a peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. This rest is a state of the soul, not the absence of problems. When their boat was caught in a great storm on the Sea of Galilee, the apostles panicked and cried out, crushed by the burden of their fear of death. Meanwhile, Jesus was sleeping peacefully at the back of the boat. They woke him, shouting, "Teacher, we are going to die." He stood up and calmed the storm. But before that, he asked them, "Why are you so afraid? Where is your faith?" He wanted to teach them, the storm outside cannot stir the peace within if you are with me. The rest I give you is steadfastness, even when the waves are crashing all around you. 8. The path to serenity is often surprisingly simple. Humans have a tendency to complicate things. We think that to find peace, we must perform elaborate rituals or achieve some great feat. But the Lord's invitation is incredibly simple. Come. It requires nothing more than a willing heart. A woman named Martha and her sister Mary welcomed Jesus into their home. Martha was busy and anxious, preparing everything, the burden of perfection weighing heavily upon her. Mary, however, simply sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his words. Martha complained, "Lord, please tell my sister to help me." Jesus replied, "Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things, but only one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen the better part. The path to rest is sometimes not about doing more, but about knowing when to stop and simply be present." 9. The invitation to rest is for everyone. It is universal. Jesus says, "All you who," excluding no one. No matter who you are, where you come from, what your past is like, or what your burden is, tax collector, sinner, Gentile, rich, poor, this invitation is for you. No burden is too great, no soul is too distant to come. Beside a well in Samaria, Jesus struck up a conversation with a woman who was ostracized by society for her personal life. The apostles were surprised to see their teacher speaking to such a person. Jesus spoke to her of living water. He not only offered her water to quench her physical thirst, but also saw the burden of shame and loneliness she was carrying. He later told his apostles, "I have not come only for the lost sheep of Israel. I have come for all who are thirsty and weary, no matter where they are." My heart has enough room for all the burdens of humanity. 10. Surrender is the final act to completely cast off a burden. Coming, acknowledging, and sharing are crucial steps. But the final and most decisive step to obtaining complete rest is to surrender. That is, to fully trust and hand over our burden to the Lord without trying to take it back. It is the act of letting go of control and believing that He can carry it better than we can. Before He was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus Himself experienced the ultimate burden. He prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." The Apostle John, who witnessed that moment, later understood. He told the believers, "That night, the teacher himself showed us the final lesson of rest. When faced with the greatest burden imaginable, he did not try to endure it alone. He went to the Father, and his final act was to surrender." That is how a soul, no matter how great its anguish, can find the peace to complete its mission. 11. The Lord's yoke is love, not law. When Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you," he is not adding a new burden. The world's yoke is made of rigid laws, judgment, and the heavy weight of having to prove oneself. But the Lord's yoke is crafted from love and lined with grace. It is not a burden, but a tool that helps us walk in the right direction, a connection that allows us to walk with him, sharing his strength. A young Levite, who had lived his entire life under hundreds of laws, came to Jesus. He was weary from the constant fear of making a mistake. He asked, "Teacher, how can I please God completely?" Jesus looked at him but did not quote the law. He simply said, "Do you love the beggar on the street corner? Do you share your meal with the hungry widow? Do not try to carry the heavy yoke of every rule. Take my yoke, which is the yoke of love. When you love, you will no longer feel the burden of what you must do, but only the joy of what you get to do." 12. True rest is the stillness of the mind. Burdens lie not only in physical work, but largely in restless thoughts and worries that swirl in our heads. The rest that the Lord gives is a sacred stillness, the ability to quiet our noisy minds and find a peaceful space even in the midst of life's storms. The Apostle Thomas was a man who often overthought and worried. One day, while the group was resting under the shade of a tree, he was still pacing back and forth with a preoccupied look. Jesus called to him, "Thomas, come sit with me." Thomas sat down but was still restless. He said, "Teacher, I am worried about our upcoming journey, about the dangers, about what we will eat and where we will stay." Jesus placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You are trying to carry the entire future in a single moment. Look at the birds. They do not worry. Look at this lily. It does not scheme. Your mind is like a rippling lake, unable to reflect the sky. Let me still that lake for you. My rest begins with the very stillness in your mind." 13. Peace is being freed from the burden of the past. Many of us are shackled by the mistakes and regrets of yesterday. We carry them like a shadow, and it exhausts us. "Come to me" also means to bring our entire past, trusting that he has the power to erase the burden of sin and heal the heart's wounds, giving us a fresh start. A woman caught in the act of adultery was brought before Jesus. Her burden was not just the stones people were about to throw, but the weight of her shame and sin. After dismissing the crowd, Jesus was left alone with her. She dared not look up. Jesus said gently, "I do not condemn you. The burden of what you have done, leave it here. I did not come to remind you of your sin, but to make you forget its power. Go and sin no more. You are now free from your past." 14. Rest is ceasing to worry about tomorrow and trusting in providence. Worrying about the future is one of the most common and useless burdens. It exhausts us over things that have not happened and may never happen. The Lord's rest is an invitation to trust in the care of a heavenly Father who knows what we need even before we ask. A farmer named Barnabas had a bountiful harvest. But instead of rejoicing, he was worried. He said to Jesus, "Teacher, what should I do? My barns are not big enough. I fear thieves and spoilage." Jesus replied, "Barnabas, you are trying to carry all of next year on today's shoulders. You worry about storing up treasures on earth, but you let your soul hunger for peace. Be thankful for today. Share with those in need and entrust tomorrow to God. Rest is not found in a full barn, but in a trusting heart." 15. Rest is found in the present moment. We are tired because our minds are not still. They are either agonizing over the past or anxious about the future. We rarely live fully in the present moment. The Lord's invitation is a call to return to the now, for it is only here and now that we can meet Him and receive peace. Jesus and His disciples were walking along a country road. The disciples were arguing heatedly about who would be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Their minds were in a distant future. Jesus stopped, pointed to a wild flower by the roadside, and said, "Look at this flower. It does not dream of blooming more brilliantly tomorrow. Nor is it sad that yesterday it was just a bud. It is living the fullness of its beauty in this very moment. You too are weary from your debates about the future, forgetting my presence right here. Come to me in this moment. Rest is right here." 16. Burdens vanish. When we realize our worth doesn't come from what we do. The world teaches us that a person's value is measured by achievements, status, or wealth. The constant need to prove ourselves is a terrible burden. Jesus comes to tell us that our value is absolute because we are beloved children of God. Rest comes when we stop doing to be loved and start living because we are loved. A tax collector named Zacchaeus, who was wealthy but despised by all, climbed a sycamore tree to see Jesus. He carried the burden of isolation and shame. When Jesus called him by name and wanted to come to his house, Zacchaeus was astonished. At his house, Jesus did not talk about money or sin. He was simply present. That unconditional acceptance lifted Zacchaeus' burden. He stood up and said, "Lord, I give half of my possessions to the poor." Jesus smiled and said to everyone, "He does this not to buy salvation. He does this because he has realized his worth is not in his wealth, and a soul at rest always desires to share." 17. Weariness is born from comparison. Rest comes from gratitude. One of the sources of spiritual exhaustion is the habit of comparing ourselves to others, our talents, possessions, or holiness. This always leads to either pride or insecurity. The escape from this burden is to practice gratitude, focusing on what we have been given rather than what we lack. During a meal, the apostles began comparing themselves to one another. Peter boasted of being the first to confess his faith. John whispered about being the beloved disciple. They grew tense. Jesus took a piece of bread, broke it, and gave thanks. He said, "This bread does not compare itself to larger loaves. It simply offers itself in gratitude. You are tired because you are looking at each other. Look up to the Father and give thanks for what each of you has received. When gratitude fills the heart, there is no room left for comparison." 18. Forgiving others is lifting a burden from our own soul. Holding a grudge or hatred toward someone is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. The burden of unforgiveness makes our soul heavy and weary. The Lord's invitation is also an invitation to forgive, to set free not only the other person, but ourselves. Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, How many times shall I forgive my brother? Up to 7 times? He thought 7 was a very generous number. Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. He then told him the parable of the unmerciful servant who was forgiven a huge debt by the king, but refused to forgive his friend a small one. He concluded, Peter, every time you refuse to forgive, you are tying a stone to your own leg. That burden will drag you down. Come to me. Learn to forgive as your heavenly Father has forgiven you. Lift that burden, and you will see how light your soul can be. 19. Amidst the world's noise, rest is learning to listen. The world is full of voices, the voice of ambition, of fear, of public opinion, of judgment. We become tired from trying to listen to them all. The rest that the Lord offers is an inner silence where we can hear His gentle, loving whisper, the only voice that truly matters. The prophet Elijah of old did not find God in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a still, small voice. Following that example, one day when a noisy crowd surrounded him, demanding miracles, Jesus withdrew to a mountain alone to pray. When he returned, the apostles asked him what he had done. Jesus replied, I went to find rest, not rest for the body, but so my soul could listen to my Father's voice amidst the countless voices of the world. You too should frequently find a quiet place. Come to me in the silence. There you will hear what you need to hear, and your souls will find rest. 20. Rest is not just for recovery. It is also a teacher. When we stop, when we rest in the Lord, it is not an empty state. It is in those quiet moments that we receive illumination, new insights about ourselves, about God, and about the path ahead. Rest is a classroom for the soul. After the disciples returned from their first mission trip, they joyfully reported all they had done. They were excited, but also exhausted. Jesus said to them, Come away by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. In that quietness, he did not let them simply sleep. He began to explain to them deeper things about the kingdom of heaven. The Apostle Matthew later realized, At the time, we thought the teacher was just letting us rest our bodies. But in reality, he was letting our minds rest from the excitement of success so we could receive wiser lessons. The teacher's rest always comes with revelation. 21. Life has a natural rhythm of labor and rest. God created the universe in 6 days and rested on the 7th. He established a sacred rhythm. Humans become weary when they break this rhythm, when they plunge into ceaseless work, disregarding the needs of both body and soul. Come to me is also an invitation to return to the wise rhythm of the Creator. A carpenter named Joseph in Nazareth was always overworking. He worked 7 days a week, fearing that if he took a day off, his family would lack what they needed. He became irritable and exhausted. Jesus, as a young man working beside his foster father, said to him, Father, this saw, if used constantly without being sharpened, will become useless. The land, if farmed continuously without rest, will become barren. You are the same. A day of rest is not a lost day, but a day to sharpen the soul and body. God rested not because he was tired, but to teach us the wisdom of rhythm. 22. We find rest not only alone, but also in communion. The invitation, Come to me, is not just a personal one. It is also an invitation to the community, to his body. When we share our burdens with our brothers and sisters in faith, when we pray together and support one another, each person's burden seems to become much lighter. 2 disciples were on their way to Emmaus. their hearts heavy because their teacher had just been crucified. They carried the burden of disappointment and brokenness. Jesus appeared and walked with them. They did not recognize him, but as they shared their sorrows, their hearts began to burn within them. When they invited him to stay, and he broke bread with them, their eyes were opened. The lesson is this: when 2 or 3 share a common burden in Jesus' name, he is present among them. Rest is multiplied when it is shared in community. 23. The burden of perfection is unbearable. Rest is found in grace. Many of us, especially those who are dedicated, often place the burden of perfection upon ourselves. We want to be the perfect child, parent, or believer. This effort inevitably leads to exhaustion and disappointment. Rest is accepting that we are not perfect, but we are loved perfectly by a God full of grace. Nicodemus, a Jewish leader, came to Jesus at night. He was a model citizen, following the law perfectly, yet his soul had no peace. He carried the burden of maintaining that perfect image. Jesus spoke to him about being born again, a concept that upended all his efforts. He was implying, Nicodemus, you cannot achieve perfection on your own. That burden is too great. Let it go. Let God's grace make you new. Rest is not about achieving perfection, but about letting God's perfection envelop our imperfection. 24. A great burden is lifted by many small steps of faith. Sometimes our burden seems too large, like an immovable mountain. We feel overwhelmed. But the invitation come does not demand a phenomenal leap. It only invites us to take the small step right in front of us, and then the next. Many small steps taken in trust will carry us over the entire mountain. A father whose child was gravely ill traveled a great distance to find Jesus. When he met him, he was exhausted and nearly hopeless. He said, "Teacher, I don't know what to do anymore. This burden is too much for me." Jesus did not demand a grand act of faith. He simply said, "Just believe." Then he added, "Now go back home." The first step of faith was the plea. The second step was to trust. The third step was to obey and return. It was the journey home, step by step, that strengthened his faith. The burden was lifted not in a single moment, but through a series of small, obedient actions. 25. Tears are not weakness, but the language of a soul unloading its burden. Some people think that coming to God means one must be strong and hide their pain. But in truth, he invites even the broken-hearted. Tears before the Lord are not a sign of a lack of faith, but an act of release, a way for the burden of sorrow to flow out, making room for his comfort to enter. When Lazarus, a friend of Jesus, died, his sister Mary came to meet Jesus. She did not say much. She just fell at his feet and wept. She had been carrying the burden of her grief for days. When Jesus saw her weeping, his heart was deeply moved, and he wept with her. He did not tell her not to cry. He accepted and shared her pain. It was in those shared tears that Mary's burden was shared. Rest sometimes is not the absence of tears, but having someone who is willing to weep with us. 26. God's wisdom is often folly in the world's eyes. The world honors strength, self-control, and relentless work. The idea of resting in weakness or finding strength in surrender seems strange. But the philosophy of the kingdom of heaven often inverts the world's philosophy. Coming to Jesus for rest is an act of faith that goes against the human instinct for self-reliance. A Greek scholar, accustomed to the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle, came to hear Jesus teach. He heard him say, "Come to me, all you who are weary." Afterwards, he said to the Apostle Philip, "How strange! Our philosophers teach men to become strong, to use reason to overcome all emotion and burdens. Yet your teacher invites the weak. Isn't that a philosophy for failures?" Philip replied, "Perhaps it seems so to the world. But we have learned that admitting our weakness before God is precisely where true strength begins. The rest he gives is greater than all human reason." 27. Caring for the body is also a spiritual act. Burdens are not just in the soul, they manifest in the exhaustion of the body. The invitation to rest also implies that we must respect the limits of the bodies God has given us. A good night's sleep, a proper meal, and a day off from work are also ways of responding to his call. After a long day of teaching and healing thousands, Jesus and his disciples were tired and hungry. Some disciples still wanted to continue, thinking the work of the kingdom could not be delayed. But Jesus said, "Let us now go over to the other side and rest for a while." He who had multiplied the loaves to feed the crowd also made sure his own disciples ate. He taught them, "You cannot pour from an empty vessel. This body is a temple. Caring for it is not selfish. It is keeping the temple strong for continued service. Come, let us eat and rest." 28. Peace of soul is the true treasure. All other riches can become burdens. People labor to accumulate wealth, fame, and power, thinking these will guarantee a life of ease. But Jesus shows that these very things often become the greatest burdens, the burden of fearing loss, of insatiable greed. True rest is an inner treasure, independent of what we possess. A rich young man came to Jesus asking how to gain eternal life. He had kept all the commandments since he was a boy. He had everything, yet he still felt a void. His soul was still weary. Jesus looked at him and said, "You lack one thing. Go, sell everything you have and give to the poor, and then come, follow me." This invitation was not just about money. It was an invitation to cast off the burden of wealth, the burden of believing that possessions can provide security. The young man went away sad because he could not let go of his precious burden. He chose to keep his burden instead of the treasure of peace. 29. True rest does not lead to selfishness, but equips us for service. Some mistakenly think rest means becoming passive and self-absorbed, but rest in the Lord has the opposite effect. It fills us with love and strength so that we can serve others more joyfully and effectively, not from a place of depletion, but from a place of abundance. After Jesus let his disciples rest, healed them, and taught them, he sent them out again. He said, "As the Father has sent me, I am sending you." The Apostle John, in his old age, reflected on this. He wrote, "He invited us to come and rest, not so we would remain in that comfort forever. He refilled our souls, like a person filling a lamp with oil, and then he lit us and set us out in the world. His rest is the preparation for action." 30. The rest we find in the Lord in this life is a glimpse of eternal peace. The peace and serenity we feel when we come to Jesus are not the final destination. They are a foretaste, a trailer for the complete and eternal rest that God has promised to those who believe in him in the kingdom of heaven. This gives our earthly burdens new meaning and a great hope. At the Last Supper, when the disciples' hearts were heavy knowing their teacher was about to leave, Jesus said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. My Father's house has many rooms. I am going there to prepare a place for you." He gave them his peace right in the midst of the storm. It was not a peace that excluded suffering, but a deeper peace, born from a promise. He meant to say, "The rest you have with me now, though precious, is but a shadow of the glorious rest that awaits you. The burdens of this life are temporary, but rest in the Father is eternal. Carry that hope with you, and your burdens will become light." Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 31. Rest is freeing yourself from the burden of expectations. We carry not only our own burdens, but also the weight of others' expectations, from family, society, and friends. We grow tired from having to live up to a certain image. "Come to me" is an invitation to take off the masks, to drop the roles, and to dare to be ourselves before God, who knows and loves us more than what we try to show. A young man in the crowd following Jesus was the son of a famous Pharisee. He always carried the burden of having to appear as wise and devout as his father. He dared not ask questions or show any weakness. Jesus sensed his struggle. He told a parable about 2 trees. One was pruned daily to achieve a perfect shape, but bore no fruit, while the other grew freely as God created it, and was heavy with fruit. Then he looked at the young man and said, "You are tired from trying to be a tree in the eyes of others. I do not call you according to your father's expectations or society's. I call you, come to me with all your imperfections. True rest is the freedom to grow into the person I created you to be." 32. The door to rest is widest for those with childlike faith. As adults, we often complicate faith. We analyze, debate, and doubt. Children are different. They trust completely and simply. The Lord's invitation does not require profound knowledge, but a simple trust like that of a child taking their father's hand, believing he will lead them to safety. When the disciples were arguing about complex theological issues, Jesus called a child over and placed him in their midst. He said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." You are carrying the burden of human wisdom. This child does not worry about what you debate. He only knows that his parents love him. Come to me with such simple faith. Do not try to understand everything. Just trust me, and you will find rest. 33. Weariness clouds. Judgment, rest brings clarity. When we are exhausted, every decision becomes difficult, and every problem seems larger than it is. A tired mind cannot think clearly. Rest in the Lord not only restores energy, but also purifies the mind, helping us see things more clearly and calmly, thereby making wiser choices. A synagogue leader named Jairus, whose daughter was dying, ran to Jesus in a state of absolute panic. The burden of fear had nearly driven him out of his mind. Jesus told him one simple thing: "Don't be afraid, just believe." It was an invitation to rest in faith, right in the middle of the storm. After bringing the child back to life, Jesus did not rush away. He calmly told the family, "Give her something to eat." This act showed the clarity that returns after a burden is lifted. He taught that rest restores not only faith, but also the most practical judgment. 34. It takes courage to be vulnerable. Rest is for those who dare to be real. The world teaches us to hide our weaknesses. Having to always appear strong and flawless is an incredibly tiring burden. Come to me requires a different kind of courage. The courage to admit we are imperfect. The courage to expose our wounds. The courage to say, I need help. Rest is reserved for souls brave enough to be real. The Apostle Peter, after denying the Lord 3 times, carried the heavy burden of shame and failure. He dared not face anyone. He returned to his old profession, trying to forget everything. After the resurrection, Jesus sought him out by the seashore. He did not scold him. He only asked a simple question 3 times. Simon, do you love me? He gave Peter the chance to confront his weakness and be true to his love. It was in that honest and painful confrontation that Peter found rest for his soul and was restored to his mission. 35. Nature is a sanctuary of rest. Sometimes our burdens come from being confined for too long within concrete walls and human anxieties. Jesus frequently withdrew to the mountains, the seashore, or the wilderness. Nature, God's handiwork, has a remarkable healing power. It reminds us of the Creator's greatness and the smallness of our worries. After many stressful and noisy days in Jerusalem, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go to the fields outside the city." As they sat on a hill looking down, he said, "Breathe deeply. This air is a gift. Listen to the sound of the wind. It is the breath of God. Look at those mountains. They have stood firm for generations. Is your burden greater than these mountains? Let the stillness of nature seep into your souls. This too is a way of coming to me and finding rest." 36. The greatest burden is the illusion of control. Rest is the act of letting go. We exhaust ourselves trying to control everything in our lives, our careers, our health, our loved ones, and our future. But the truth is, we control very little. This burden comes from the illusion that we are the ones steering the ship. True rest is the courageous act of letting go of the wheel and trusting the Almighty, the true captain of our lives. A vineyard owner named Manahem anxiously inspected every vine each day. He controlled the amount of water, picked off every pest, and grew angry when a strong wind knocked off a few leaves. He never had peace. Jesus passed by and asked, "Friend, who makes the sun rise each morning to warm your vineyard?" Manahem replied, "God, of course." Jesus asked again, "And who makes the rain fall to water it?" "God does that too," he answered. Jesus smiled. "Then why do you try to carry the burden of both the sun and the rain on your shoulders? Do your part and let God do his. Rest is found in that division of labor. 37. The invitation to rest never expires. It is new every morning. Perhaps we rejected the invitation yesterday, or we found rest but lost it again today to new worries. Burdens are a daily reality. But the good news is, so is the Lord's invitation. His grace is new every morning. Every day is a new opportunity to come to Him and lay down that day's burden. A woman used to go to the well at noon during the hottest part of the day to avoid everyone. Every day, she carried the burden of loneliness and judgment. One day, she met Jesus there. He gave her living water and lifted her burden. But the next day, old habits and fears crept back in. She hesitated, unsure if she should go to the well again. But then she remembered his words. She realized that, just as the sun rises again, his invitation was there waiting for her. The well of living water does not run dry after one day. She stepped out courageously and realized that rest is not a one-time event, but a daily choice. 38. The world promotes ceaseless striving. The kingdom offers rest in a sense of enough. The culture around us often glorifies busyness. The busier a person seems, the more important they appear. Doing nothing is seen as laziness. This is a burden of our time. Jesus comes to introduce a counter-philosophy. Our value is not in how busy we are, but in how connected we are to Him. Rest is an act of resistance against the culture of burnout. Jesus saw a shoemaker toiling away in his shop, even though it was late at night. Everyone who passed by praised his diligence. Jesus went inside and asked, "Friend, why are you still working?" The craftsman replied, "I must work to make a living, to prove my worth." Jesus said, "You already have worth. The chair you are sitting on doesn't have to do anything to be a chair. It simply is. You are the same. Come to me and learn the meaning of enough." Rest is not the enemy of work. It is its companion, helping your work to come not from fear, but from joy. 39. Silence is also a prayer. When language becomes powerless. Sometimes our burden is so great that we have no words to describe it. The pain is too deep, the weariness too immense. In those moments, coming to me does not require a formal prayer or eloquent words. Sometimes it is simply a silent presence, bringing our heavy soul and sitting quietly at His feet. That silence is the most eloquent prayer of all. When Jesus heard that John the Baptist, his kinsman, had Trian beheaded, he did not give a speech or cry out. The Bible records that he withdrew by himself to a desolate place. His disciples saw him just sitting there, silently looking out over the water. They dared not disturb him. Later, Andrew asked him, "What were you praying at that time, teacher?" Jesus replied, "There are some burdens that words cannot carry." At that moment, my very silence was my prayer to the Father. You too, when you do not know what to say, do not force it. Just come and sit quietly with me. I understand the language of silence. 440. Rest in faith is often the soil where miracles sprout. When we worry, fear, and try to solve everything ourselves, we harden our souls, leaving no room for God's intervention. When we let go, rest, and trustingly surrender, we are making our souls soft and fertile. It is on that soil of rest and trust that the seeds of miracles can sprout. The woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years had spent all her money on doctors, but only grew worse. She carried the burden of sickness, poverty, and legal impurity. She was exhausted from striving. One day, she decided to give up all her own efforts. She had only one single act of faith. If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. It was an act of ultimate surrender, a rest from all human methods. And the moment she touched it, the miracle happened. Her rest from saving herself opened the way for God's power to act. 41. Knowledge without love can become a burden. The scribes and Pharisees were the most knowledgeable about the scriptures. They carried a treasure trove of knowledge. But for many of them, that knowledge had become a burden of pride, a tool to judge others rather than a spring of love. True rest is when the knowledge of the head is warmed by the love of the heart. A young scribe came to debate with Jesus, quoting prophets and laws verbatim. He spoke a great deal, but his face was tense. Jesus listened patiently, then asked him one question. Of all the laws, which is the most important? After he answered correctly about loving God and neighbor, Jesus said, "You have answered correctly, but you are carrying that knowledge like a bag of stones on your back. You know much about love, but have you lived it? Come to me and learn how to turn those stones of knowledge into bread to feed others. Rest is not in how much you know, but in how much you love." 42. No pillow is as soft as a clear conscience. One of the burdens that costs us the most sleep is a guilty conscience. Unforgiven mistakes, unconfessed lies, hidden injustices, they weigh down our souls. The invitation, "Come to me," is also an invitation to come to the truth, to repentance and reconciliation, to find again the peace of a clear conscience. After betraying Jesus, Judas carried the burden of 30 pieces of silver. That money burned his conscience. He tried to unload the burden in the wrong way, by returning it to the priests, who could not grant forgiveness. Conversely, Peter, after denying the Lord, wept bitterly. He brought his burden to Jesus himself in repentance. Jesus, after his resurrection, did not mention his sin. He only gave him a new mission. "Feed my sheep." He wiped Peter's conscience clean, giving him the most precious rest, so he could continue his journey. 43. A burden becomes lighter when we see God's bigger picture. We get tired because we only see a small fragment of our lives. We are trapped in the details of our immediate difficulties, like an ant lost in a crack in the pavement. "Come to me" is an invitation to climb to a higher vantage point, to see God's perspective, where our winding roads are actually part of a grand and good plan. When John the Baptist was in prison, he began to doubt. He carried the burden of confusion. He sent his disciples to ask Jesus, "Are you the one who is to come?" Jesus didn't answer yes or no. He said, "Go back and report to John what you see and hear. The blind receive sight, the lame walk." He was inviting John to look at the bigger picture, to see the signs of the kingdom's arrival, instead of focusing only on the burden of his 4 prison walls. Upon seeing that God's work was still continuing, the burden of doubt would be lifted. 44. The body remembers the burdens the mind wants to forget. There are traumas and fears so deep that our minds bury them, but the body does not forget. They manifest as unexplained pain, tension, and chronic fatigue. The rest that the Lord offers is a holistic healing that touches even the painful memories the body holds, freeing us from burdens we are not even conscious of. A woman who had been crippled for 18 years came to the synagogue. She carried her burden in a visible way. The illness not only bent her body, but also weighed down her spirit. Jesus called her forward. He did not just speak a word. He placed his hands on her. There was a physical touch, a recognition that this burden had been remembered by her body for too long. When he said, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity," not only was her back straightened, but a burden of 18 years in her soul and her body's memory was also lifted. 45. The Lord's burden doesn't sap strength, it gives purpose. Jesus said, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." This is a paradox. How can a yoke, a burden, be light? Because the world's burdens, ambition, fear drain our energy. But the Lord's burden, the burden of love, of mission, of purpose, gives us energy. Living with purpose makes all labor meaningful and lighter. The disciples, as fishermen, toiled for their daily bread. That was a burden. But when Jesus called them and said, "Follow me, and I will make you fishers of men," he placed a new burden on their shoulders. This burden required them to give up everything and face danger. But strangely, they seemed full of life, because now every step they took had a purpose. Their labor was no longer meaningless. Peter would later say, "It is better to be tired from preaching the gospel than to be tired from pulling up empty nets." 46. Rest is being freed from the prison of the fear of man. One of the biggest prisons we lock ourselves in is the fear of what other people think. This burden controls our actions, our words, and even our dreams. We dare not do the right thing for fear of criticism. We dare not be ourselves for fear of rejection. Come to me is to receive the only approval that matters, God's approval, and thus be set free. Many of the Jewish leaders believed in Jesus, but the Bible says they would not confess their faith publicly, for they loved human glory more than the glory of God. They chose to remain in the prison of that burden. In contrast, Jesus confronted them and spoke the truth without fear, because he was not seeking their approval. He told his disciples, "Do not be afraid of those who kill the body." He was inviting them out of the prison of fear and into the freedom and rest of a person who lives to please God alone. 47. True rest isn't doing nothing, but waiting in trust. In a world that demands immediate action and results, waiting is seen as a waste of time. But in the spiritual life, waiting is a profoundly active state. It is an active rest, a refusal to act in some way, and instead to trust in God's perfect timing. Lazarus's family sent word to Jesus when he fell ill, but he did not come right away. He waited. For Mary and Martha, that waiting was a burden of confusion and grief. When Jesus arrived, Martha said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus showed that his waiting was not indifference, but was for a greater glory to be revealed. He teaches us that resting while waiting, however difficult, is an act of deep faith, trusting that God's delay is not God's denial. 48. The weariness of a purposeless life is heavier than the toil of a noble cause. Before meeting the Lord, many of us live without a clear direction. We wander from one pleasure to another, and that emptiness creates a unique kind of fatigue, a burden of meaninglessness. Taking on the yoke of the Lord, though it requires sacrifice, lifts the burden of aimlessness because it gives our lives a direction and an ultimate meaning. The Samaritan woman at the well had had 5 husbands, and the man she was currently with was not her husband. She was tired from a life of searching for love and satisfaction in one place after another. That was the burden of aimlessness. Jesus offered her living water, a purpose, a relationship that filled her emptiness. Immediately, she left her water jar, a symbol of her old needs, and ran into the town to testify about him. She was no longer tired. She had found a new kind of labor, but it was the joyful labor of someone who had found her purpose. 49. A soul at rest in God is like a cool pool of water. A person carrying a burden tends to spread their stress and fatigue to others. Conversely, a person who has truly found rest in the Lord radiates an atmosphere of peace. Their very presence can calm the troubled souls around them, like a still, cool lake on a hot summer day. At the Last Supper, while the disciples were confused, fearful, and arguing, Jesus, though about to face the greatest burden, was the most peaceful person in the room. He was the eye of the storm. He knelt and washed their feet. The act of someone completely at rest in the Father's will brought a stunning peace to the entire room. He said, "My peace I give to you." He didn't just say it. He transmitted that peace through his presence and actions. A person who is truly at rest becomes a source of rest for others. 50. All rest in this life is preparation for the final reunion. All the moments of peace, the unburdenings, the healings we experience here, though real and precious, are still just shadows, foretastes of the great and final rest. The invitation, "Come to me," is not just for today. It is an invitation to a lifelong journey toward our eternal home, where every tear will be wiped away and every burden will vanish forever. On the cross, just before his last breath, Jesus uttered, "It is finished." Those are the words of one who has carried the greatest burden of all humanity and has completed his work. And then he said, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." That was the ultimate act of rest, a complete return home. His invitation to us, ultimately, is the same. He invites us to come to him daily, to practice surrender, to taste peace, in preparation for the day when we too can say, "It is finished," and enter into eternal rest in his loving embrace. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. 51. Rest is found, not only in receiving, but also in the joy of giving. This is a paradox of the kingdom of heaven. We often think we are tired because we have given too much and need to receive. But sometimes, weariness comes from being too focused on ourselves and our own needs. The act of giving generously, without calculation, a smile, a word of encouragement, a meal, can fill our souls with an unexpected energy and joy, which is also a profound form of rest. In the temple, Jesus watched the rich put large sums of money into the offering box. They did so heavily, as if it were a duty. Then a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, all she had to live on. Jesus called his disciples to him and said, "The rich gave out of their wealth, and their burdens remain. But this widow, in giving her all, has found freedom." When you give from your own need with a trusting heart, you will receive back not wealth, but rest for your soul. For in that moment, you are acting most like your Father in heaven. 52. The burden of our age is ceaseless noise. Rest is finding an oasis of silence in the soul. Noise comes not only from the outside, the marketplace, the crowds, but also from within us, the voice of anxiety, of judgment, of endless desires. We are taunt because we have no moment of quiet. "Come to me" is an invitation to bravely turn off those sounds, to discover that right in our own soul, there is a silent place where only God's presence resides. A weaver named Samuel lived near a noisy market. He complained to Jesus, "Teacher, how can I find peace in this chaotic place?" Jesus replied, "The outside may be noisy, but the greatest noise is within your own heart. You do not need to move your house to find quiet. You only need to find the quiet room within your heart. Practice spending a few minutes each day, closing your eyes and doing nothing but listening to your own breath. Gradually, you will discover an oasis of silence that no worldly noise can touch. That is where I am waiting for you. 53. The burden of loneliness is lifted when we realize we belong to a larger family. Loneliness is one of the most painful and coldest burdens. The feeling of not belonging, of having no one who truly understands us, is draining. When Jesus invites us to come to me, he is not just inviting us into a private relationship, but also into a family. The family of all who are also seeking rest in him. When someone told Jesus that his mother and brothers were outside looking for him, he did not rush out. Instead, he looked at those sitting around him. The fishermen, the tax collectors, the women, the sinners, and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers, for whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and mother." He was teaching that when we come to him, we are never alone again. We belong to a new family, one bound not by blood, but by love and faith, where we can share one another's burdens. 54. Rest is not a feeling we wait for, but a decision we make in faith. We often say, "When I feel peaceful, I will rest." But faith works the other way around. We must decide to rest first, decide to trust and surrender first, even while our hearts are still in turmoil. And then, the feeling of peace will follow as a result of that choice. When the disciples were in the boat during the storm, they were terrified. They were waiting for the storm to pass so they could feel safe. But Jesus, after calming the sea, did not say, "Now you can feel peaceful." Instead, he asked, "Where is your faith?" He wanted them to understand that faith is the choice to trust in his presence, even while the waves are still crashing against the boat. The decision to trust him is the act of rest. The calm sea is merely a confirmation of that decision. 55. The burden of self-reliance is one of the most prideful and tiring burdens. Our culture often praises self-made people, those who don't need to rely on anyone. But having to constantly prove that we are capable, smart and strong enough to overcome everything on our own is a burden of pride. It prevents us from receiving help from both God and people. "Come to me" is an invitation to abandon the burden of self-reliance and embrace rest in interdependence. The Apostle Paul later recounted his experience. He had a thorn in his flesh that caused him pain. He tried to endure it on his own and pleaded with the Lord 3 times to take it away. But the Lord answered him, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul learned a precious lesson. He said, "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses." He had given up the burden of self-reliance and discovered that, in embracing his dependence on God's grace, he had found incredible strength and rest. 56. Rest is knowing when to stop and give thanks for the road already traveled. We are often tired because our eyes are always fixed on what's ahead, the next mountain to climb, the next problem to solve. We forget how far we've already come. Taking time to look back and give thanks for what God has done, for the difficulties overcome, for the blessings received, is a way to recharge our souls and find rest in gratitude. In the story of the 10 lepers who were healed, all 10 received a miracle, but only one came back. He came, fell at Jesus' feet, and thanked him profusely. Jesus asked, "Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Then he said to the one who had returned, Rise and go, your faith has made you well." The other 9 received only physical healing, but this man, because he knew to stop and give thanks, received both rest and salvation for his soul. 57. Weariness is trying to live by our own strength. Rest is learning to breathe the air of grace. Grace is not just initial forgiveness. It is the very atmosphere a believer is invited to live in every day. When we forget that and start trying to be good and devout through our own efforts, we quickly become exhausted. It's like a person trying to run while holding their breath. "Come to me" is a reminder to breathe deeply, to live by the energy of grace, not by our own willpower. Jesus told the parable of the prodigal son. When the younger son returned, the older brother was working in the field. He was angry that his father was throwing a party for a wayward sibling. The older brother said to his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders." He was tired. He lived by his own strength, by effort and merit. He didn't know how to breathe the air of love and grace in his father's house. The rest, the party, the joy were all there. But he stood outside on his own, weighed down by the burden of his own righteousness. 58. The burden of wanting to fix. Everyone will crush us. Many well-intentioned people take on the burden of a savior complex. They want to fix their spouse, their children, their friends. They rush in to give advice, try to control others' behavior, and then become tired and disappointed when things don't change. Rest is when we humbly realize there is only one Savior, and our role is to love and to pray, not to change people. Mary and Martha both loved their brother Lazarus. When he was sick, they did everything they could. They tried to fix the situation, but in the end, they were powerless. Their burden reached its peak when Lazarus died. When Jesus arrived, all they could say was, "Lord, if you had been here." It was an admission of their own powerlessness. And at that very point, Jesus, the true healer, acted. He teaches us that rest comes when we hand over our burden of fixing to Him and trust in His power. 59. Rest is hidden in plain, everyday work. We often seek rest in faraway places, a vacation, a pilgrimage, a retreat. Those things are good, but the Lord also invites us to find rest in our daily lives. The act of washing a dish, sweeping a floor, or sewing a garment, if done with a present and peaceful heart, can become a form of meditation and an opportunity to connect with God. Jesus lived for 30 years in Nazareth, doing the work of an ordinary carpenter. He didn't begin his mission with grand miracles, but with faithfulness in small things. He found rest and connection with his Father, not only on the high mountains, but also at the workbench, in the smell of wood, in the precision of a cut. He teaches us that the soul can be at rest even when the hands are working, as long as our heart is in the right place, in the presence of God. 60. The wisdom of rest sometimes lies in the ability to say no. We are tired because we say yes to too many things, too many requests, too many activities, too many ambitions. We are afraid of disappointing others, afraid of missing out. The burden of being overcommitted is one we create ourselves. Learning to say no to good things so we can say yes to the best things, like peace, time for family, time for God, is a crucial spiritual discipline for obtaining rest. Martha was a kind and hospitable woman. When Jesus came to her house, she said yes to preparing an elaborate meal. But she also said yes to worry, comparison, and busyness. Jesus gently showed her the wisdom of saying no. He said, "Only one thing is needed. This implies that Martha could have said no to a few fancy dishes in order to say yes to sitting at his feet. Rest requires us to have discernment and the courage to set healthy boundaries. 61. Resentment is a burden we carry by choice. Holding resentment toward someone is like being forced to carry a hot rock on your back everywhere you go. It burns you, not the other person. This burden is entirely self-chosen. Forgiveness, though very difficult, is an act of the will to put that rock down, not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve to be rested and free. Jesus told the parable of the two sons. The prodigal son made a mistake, but was able to lay down his burden of sin when he returned. The older brother, in contrast, chose to pick up a new burden, the burden of resentment and unforgiveness. He stood outside the party, torturing himself with thoughts of injustice. The father came out and invited him in, saying, "My son, come in." That is God's invitation to us as well. Come in, lay down the burden of resentment, and enter into the joy of forgiveness. Do not choose to be weary. 62. Rest is not just stillness, but also laughter and joy. We often associate rest with solemnity and quiet. But an important part of the rest the Lord gives is the ability to be as carefree as a child. A hearty laugh, a joyful dance, a game played without calculation. These are wonderful ways to cast off the burden of seriousness and anxiety. The joy of the Lord is our strength. Jesus was criticized by the Pharisees as a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. This shows that he did not always maintain a solemn demeanor. He attended weddings and feasts. He laughed with those who were rejected by society. He turned water into fine wine at the wedding at Cana, not because it was an essential need, but to contribute to the joy of the party. He teaches us that rest can also be found in allowing ourselves to be joyful, to enjoy the good gifts of life without feeling guilty. 63. The burden of our age is an information deluge. Rest is daring to disconnect. Whether in ancient or modern times, people have always been surrounded by information, opinions, rumors, teachings. The burden of having to process everything, to have an opinion on everything, wears us out. Rest is the intentional act of withdrawing from that torrent of information, so we can clearly hear the only voice that truly nourishes the soul, the voice of God. After hearing of John the Baptist's death and the disciples' return from their mission trip, there was a swirl of information and emotion. Crowds continued to press in. In that context, Jesus made a decisive choice. He said to his disciples, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." He actively disconnected from the crowd and their demands. He teaches that to truly connect with God and ourselves, we sometimes must have the courage to disconnect from the outside world. 64. A restful posture of the body can invite peace to the soul. The soul and body are not separate entities. An anxious soul often leads to a tense body, shoulders hunched, fists clenched, jaw tight. Conversely, we can use our bodies to invite rest to our souls. A simple act like breathing deeply, relaxing the shoulders, or opening the palms can be a physical signal to the soul that says, "It's safe now. You can rest." When the disciples were panicking in the boat during the storm, their posture was surely one of tension and contraction. Jesus, in contrast, was sleeping. The posture of sleep is one of ultimate release and trust. His action showed not only a peaceful soul, but a completely rested body. When he stood up, he did not act in haste. He stood firm. He teaches us to pay attention to our bodies, learn to relax them as an act of faith, and the soul will follow. 65. Envy is a burden that makes the soul toxic. Envy is the evil twin of comparison. When we see others being blessed, instead of rejoicing, we feel bitter and resentful. This burden silently poisons all our joy and makes our souls ugly. True rest is learning to celebrate the success of others and trusting that God has a good and unique plan for everyone. In the parable of the workers in the vineyard, those who worked from early morning were envious of those who worked only the last hour, yet received the same wage. The burden of envy robbed them of the joy of their work and their pay. They became bitter. The owner of the vineyard, a figure of God, said, "Are you envious because I am generous?" He teaches that God's generosity is not for comparison. Rest comes when we stop looking at others' rewards and start enjoying God's goodness to us. 66. Unexpressed sadness becomes a silent burden. Society often encourages us to be strong, to get over sadness quickly. But sadness that is not allowed to be expressed, not acknowledged, does not disappear. It settles and becomes a heavy, silent rock in our hearts, affecting every aspect of our lives. Come to me is an invitation to come and find a safe place to be allowed to be sad, to be allowed to grieve. When Lazarus died, Martha went out to meet Jesus with words of faith and theology. But Mary was different. She came, fell at his feet, and simply wept. She did not try to hide the burden of her grief, and Jesus' reaction was extraordinary. The Bible says he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. He entered into her sadness. He validated her pain. Rest is not always joy. Sometimes it is the permission to grieve fully in the presence of one who understands. 67. Rest is trusting the potter, even while we are still a lump of clay. We are tired because we want to see the final product immediately. We want to know how our lives will turn out, how this difficulty will end. The burden of impatience and wanting to see the future torments us. Rest is trusting the process, believing that the great potter knows what he is doing with our lives, even when we just feel like we are being spun, pressed down, and are still shapeless. The disciples frequently worried about their position in the kingdom of heaven. They wanted to know what the final product would look like. But Jesus often spoke in parables of process, a mustard seed slowly growing, yeast slowly causing the dough to rise. He wanted to teach them to trust in the growth that the naked eye cannot see. "Come to me," he said, "and let me mold you. Do not worry about the final shape of the pot. Simply be soft clay in my hands." Rest is found in that softness and surrender. 68. A lie is a burden that must be constantly maintained. One small lie requires another lie to cover it, then another. Gradually, we must carry the burden of a complex web of deceit, always fearing discovery. It exhausts us. Living in the truth, though it may be difficult or embarrassing at first, is ultimately liberating. The truth has a lightness all its own. Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts tried to carry the burden of a lie. They wanted the reputation of generosity without paying the price. The burden of pretending to be better than they really were led to a tragic end. In contrast, the Samaritan woman, when she met Jesus, initially lied, "I have no husband." But when Jesus exposed her truth in love, she stopped running. She lived in that truth and was set free. She left her water jar, a symbol of her old life, and ran to proclaim the truth. Rest comes when we stop pretending. 69. Carrying others' burdens in prayer is not taking them on alone. When we love someone, we often feel their burdens as our own. This can exhaust us. But praying for them does not mean we have to carry their pain ourselves. Prayer is the act of bringing both the person and their burden and laying them at the feet of the Lord. It is an act of communion, of sharing the burden with the only one who can truly carry it. Jesus frequently prayed for his disciples. Before Peter denied him, he said, "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift all of you as wheat, but I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail." Jesus did not prevent Peter's trial, nor did he take on Peter's fear for him. He carried Peter in his prayer to the Father. He teaches us that the best way to help someone who is burdened is to become a conduit for that burden to God, not a final destination for it to stop. 70. Ultimately, rest is not a concept, but a person. After analyzing 69 philosophies, the most important and simplest truth lies in the original invitation itself. Come to me. Rest is not found in a system, a technique, a religion, or a set of rules. It is found in a personal, living relationship with a person, Jesus Christ. All the philosophies are just different paths leading to the same destination, which is his embrace. The Apostle John, at the Last Supper, did something incredibly simple that perfectly expresses this entire philosophy. While everyone was worried and afraid, he leaned back against Jesus' breast. He didn't ask a theological question. He didn't try to find a solution. He simply sought proximity to the very person of his teacher. That act is the summation of everything. The burdens of the world may still be there, but when we are in his close presence, resting our head on his heart, we find a rest that no words can fully describe. That is the final destination for every weary soul. Before we continue with today's journey of discovery, we would greatly appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a comment and share your feelings. If you found this content valuable, please don't forget to hit the share button to spread these positive vibes to your friends and family. And now, let's get back to the program. Chắc chắn rồi, đây là bản dịch cho phần cuối cùng của loạt bài, từ điểm 71 đến phần kết luận. 71. The burden of invisible scars. Some wounds don't bleed but ache persistently. A cruel word from childhood, a betrayal, a loss not fully grieved. We wear these invisible scars like heavy armor. Come to me is an invitation to let the great physician gently touch those scars, not to make them hurt again, but to transform them from places of pain into places of empathy and strength. A retired Roman soldier who had both witnessed and caused much violence often had nightmares. He carried the burden of what he had seen and done. He came to hear Jesus teach, always standing at a distance. One day, Jesus approached him and pointed to an old scar on the soldier's arm. He asked, "Does this scar still hurt?" The soldier was surprised. "No, sir. It has healed," Jesus said. "But there are scars in your soul that are still aching. Do not try to hide them. Bring those scars to me as well. I will not erase them, but I can turn their pain into wisdom and their shame into compassion. Rest is when your scars stop defining who you are." 72. Rest is escaping the tyranny of the urgent. We live under an invisible tyranny, the urgent. Everything must be fast, immediate. This burden makes us constantly rush, never truly present, and we neglect what is truly important, like family, health, and soul, to chase after what is urgent. Rest is a small revolution, daring to place the important above the urgent. Jair, a messenger, was always in a hurry. He ran from place to place, bringing news to everyone. He prided himself on his speed, but was always exhausted and irritable. He asked Jesus, "How can I be even more efficient in my work?" Jesus replied, "You do not need to be faster. You need to slow down. You are carrying the burden of the urgent. You think every message is equally important. Learn to distinguish. My Father's call is important, but it rarely shouts. It is a whisper. Rest so you can hear what is truly important, instead of just chasing after what is screaming the loudest." 73. Rest is being completely understood. One of the deepest forms of weariness is the feeling that no one truly understands you. We try to explain, to express ourselves, but words seem powerless. The burden of being alone in one's own thoughts and feelings is heavy indeed. Coming to Jesus is coming to one who not only hears our words, but also reads our hearts. Rest comes from the sigh of relief. Ah, finally, someone understands. After teaching in parables, the disciples would often come to Jesus privately and ask, "Explain the parable to us." They carried the burden of not understanding. Once, after explaining a complex parable, he looked at them and said, "You are tired from trying to grasp with your minds the things that belong to the heart. Do not worry. Even when you do not fully understand my words, I fully understand your hearts. Rest in that knowledge. Our connection is not based on your intelligence, but on my love." 74. The burden of self-pity. When facing difficulties, wallowing in self-pity can offer a twisted initial comfort, but it is a trap. It is a sticky burden that pulls us into a spiral of negativity and helplessness. Rest is the act of lifting our heads, shifting our gaze from our own misfortunes to the greatness and goodness of God. The man who was paralyzed at the pool of Bethesda had been there for 38 years. When Jesus asked him, "Do you want to get well?" his answer was full of self-pity. "Sir, I have no one to help me into the pool." He focused on his helplessness and his lack. Jesus did not argue. He gave a command that broke that spiral. "Get up, pick up your mat and walk." He was saying, stop focusing on the burden of self-pity. Act in faith. Rest is not being pitied by others, it is receiving the power to stand up. 75. Rest in the rituals of life. A disorganized, rhythmless life leads to chaos and fatigue. Healthy habits and rituals, like praying at a set time each day, reading a passage of scripture before bed, intentionally keeping the Sabbath, are not restrictive laws. They are anchors, the sturdy walls of a spiritual home that keep us from being swept away and provide a structure for rest. Daniel, though in a foreign land and serving as a high official, maintained the habit of getting down on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks to his God. This habit was not a burden, but his very source of strength and rest in the midst of a court full of intrigue. Jesus, too, often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. He had a life ritual, a habit of returning to his Father. He teaches us that rest does not happen by accident. It needs to be cultivated and protected by intentional habits. 76. Rest is a weapon against despair. Despair is an all-encompassing burden, like a cold, wet blanket. It whispers to us that there is no way out, no hope. In those moments, choosing to rest in God's promises, even when our feelings resist, is an act of combat. It is a declaration that we believe in the light, even when we only see darkness. When John the Baptist was in prison, he sent his disciples to question Jesus, an act bordering on despair. Jesus' answer was not just a list of miracles. It was an invitation to rest in the evidence of God's power at work in the world. He was saying, even when your circumstances seem hopeless, look, the kingdom of God is still advancing. Rest in that hope, and that hope itself will become your strength against the burden of despair. 77. The burden of what-if questions. One of the most subtle forms of self-torture is replaying the past with what-if questions. What if I hadn't said that? What if I had chosen the other path? This burden holds us prisoner to an unchangeable past. Rest is accepting grace for the past, letting go of the what-ifs, and embracing what God has for us right now. After Jesus died, the disciples were surely tormented by what-if questions. What if we had stayed awake with him in the garden? What if I hadn't denied him? But when Jesus appeared to them, he did not speak of those failures. His first words were, "Peace be with you." It was an invitation to rest from the burden of regret. He wasn't interested in the what-ifs of the past. He was only interested in giving them a new future, starting with his peace. 78. Rest is learning to receive. Many of us, especially those with a strong sense of responsibility, are better at giving than receiving. Opening ourselves up to accept help, a compliment, or a gift can make us feel awkward because it touches our pride and self-reliance. But the burden of always having to be the giver is exhausting. Rest is learning the humility to become a good receiver. When Jesus wanted to wash Peter's feet, he protested vehemently, "You shall never wash my feet!" Peter wanted to be the servant, the giver. He was not comfortable receiving such a humbling act. Jesus had to say to him plainly, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." He was teaching an important lesson. To be in a relationship with him, we must learn to receive his forgiveness, his grace, his love. Rest begins when we lay down the weapon of self-reliance and open ourselves to receive. 79. Rest in communal silence. In a world that prizes verbal communication, we feel pressure to always fill the empty spaces with conversation. But there is a deeper rest found in being able to be with someone without needing to say anything at all. That comfortable silence is a sign of ultimate trust and connection. After a long, tiring day, Jesus and his 3 closest disciples, Peter, James, and John, went up the mountain for the Transfiguration. Before that glorious event, they likely walked and sat together in silence. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he only asked of them, "Stay here and keep watch with me." He didn't need their advice or their empty platitudes. He just needed their silent presence. He teaches us that coming to him sometimes requires no words. Just bringing our presence and abiding in that communal silence is also a profound way to rest. 80. The burden of a divided heart. Jesus said, "No one can serve 2 masters." Trying to live for both God and the desires of the world, money, fame, pleasure, is a burden that tears the soul apart. It creates a constant tension and fatigue because we are continually being pulled in opposite directions. Rest is found only in single-mindedness, in a heart that has decided to choose one master. The rich young man had kept all the commandments. He had tried to serve God. But he was also serving another master, wealth. His heart was divided. When Jesus asked him to give up that other master, sell your possessions, he was inviting him to the rest of a unified heart. His burden was not his wealth, but his divided loyalty. He rejected that invitation and went away sad, continuing to carry the burden of a heart torn in two. 81. Rest is allowing yourself not to know. We carry a burden of needing to have an answer for everything. Why does evil happen? Why do good people suffer? Why is God silent? Not having answers makes us feel insecure and tired. Rest is the humility to admit, I don't know, and to trust the only one who knows all things. When the disciples asked Jesus about the end of the age, he answered frankly, "But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father." Jesus himself, in his humanity, demonstrated rest in accepting the limits of knowledge. He is teaching us, do not carry the burden of having to know everything. Carry the burden of having to trust. Peace is not found in having all the answers, but in trusting the one who is the answer. 82. The burden of unreasonable deadlines. We often set deadlines for ourselves. I must get over this grief within a month. I must be successful before I'm 30. I have to break this bad habit immediately. When we fail, we carry the added burden of failure and self-recrimination. Rest is shedding human deadlines and trusting in God's unhurried but always perfect timing. Jesus spoke of the kingdom of heaven in parables of slow growth, a mustard seed growing into a tree, yeast leavening a whole batch of dough. He never spoke of instant development. He healed the blind man at Bethsaida in 2 stages. The first time, the man saw people like trees walking. Then Jesus laid his hands on him again, and he saw clearly. God teaches that healing and spiritual growth are a process. Rest, do not be impatient. Trust that God is working on his schedule, not ours. 83. Rest through a touch. In an increasingly disconnected world, we forget the power of touch. A comforting hand on the arm, a gentle pat on the shoulder, a hug, can transmit peace and acceptance more directly than 1,000 words. Jesus did not hesitate to touch the sick and the outcast, and in doing so, he gave them rest. A man with leprosy came to Jesus, carrying the burden of physical pain and social isolation. He only dared to ask from a distance, "Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean." The Bible records a moving detail. Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. According to the law, this act would have made him unclean, but he broke through every barrier to give this man not only healing, but the rest from the burden of having been untouched for years. Sometimes coming to the Lord is coming to be touched by him in our deepest, most painful places. 84. The burden of a critical spirit. Constantly looking for faults in others and in ourselves is an energy-draining habit. A critical spirit makes us see the world through a negative and harsh lens. This burden makes it impossible to enjoy life. Rest is replacing the lens of criticism with the lens of grace, learning to see others and ourselves through God's eyes. In the story of the woman caught in adultery, the scribes and Pharisees came with the burden of a critical spirit. They didn't care about the woman. They only wanted to find fault with Jesus. Jesus shattered that burden with one sentence. "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." He turned their criticism from the woman back onto themselves. He invited them to lay down the burden of judgment and look at themselves. Rest comes when we stop throwing stones and start practicing mercy. 85. Rest is trusting the seed. When we do a good deed, speak a word of love, or sow a seed of faith, we often want to see immediate results. The burden of expecting results can discourage us when nothing seems to happen. Rest is believing in the life of the seed that has been sown, and trusting that the one who makes it grow is working silently, even if our eyes cannot see it. Jesus told the parable of the sower. Some seeds fell on the path, on rocky ground, among thorns, and on good soil. The sower had only one job: to sow. He could not control the type of soil, nor could he make the seed sprout faster. His work was finished when the seed was sown. He teaches us, do your part, which is to sow seeds of love and truth, then rest. Do not carry the burden of making it grow. That is my Father's job. 86. The burden of being easily offended. Some people live with an overly sensitive heart, easily wounded by a careless word or action from others. The constant feeling of being offended and needing to defend oneself is a perpetual burden. Rest is cultivating a stronger soul in God's love, learning to let minor things pass by without disturbing our inner peace. When the disciples were rejected by a Samaritan village, James and John were furious and hurt. They said, "Lord, do you want us to call fire down from heaven to destroy them?" They were carrying the burden of a wounded ego. Jesus rebuked them. He was teaching that rest is not found in retaliation or in proving oneself right. It is found in having an inner confidence and peace so secure that the rejections of the world cannot shake it. 87. Rest comes from healthy boundaries. We are exhausted because we let other people and their demands invade all our space and time. We don't know how to protect our energy and our peace. Come to me also means learning from him how to set necessary boundaries. Rest is not selfish. It is the wise stewardship of what God has given us. Jesus loved and served the crowds, but he also knew when to withdraw. Many times the Bible records that he withdrew to a lonely place, crossed over to the other side of the lake, or went up on a mountain by himself. He was setting a boundary. He was saying that his time with his Father and his own rest were non-negotiable. He teaches us that to be able to give sustainably, we must know how to protect our energy source. A good fence makes for a good garden. 88. The burden of regret for lost time. Looking back on life, many feel tired and regretful for wasted years, missed opportunities, and unfulfilled potential. This burden can paralyze the present and the future. Rest is believing that God is the Lord of time, and he has the power to redeem even the years that we think the locusts have eaten, and to make them part of his story of grace. The good thief on the cross had lived a wasted, sinful life. He had no time to start over. His burden was likely one of ultimate regret, but he used his last moments to come to the Lord. And Jesus did not talk about his past. He gave him an immediate future. Today, you will be with me in paradise. That promise lifted the burden of an entire lost life and gave him rest in a single moment. 89. Rest is found in simplification. Modern life encourages us to accumulate more things, more relationships, more activities, more information. The burden of this complexity makes us tired, both physically and mentally. Rest often comes from a brave decision to simplify, to let go of what is not essential to make more room for what truly matters. Jesus sent his disciples out on a mission with a very simple instruction. Take nothing for the journey. No staff, no bag, no bread, no money, no extra shirt. He was teaching them about rest in simplicity and dependence. The burden of worrying about too many material possessions would distract them from their main mission. A simple life leads to a free soul and a stronger faith. 90. The burden of impatience. Impatience is a state of internal friction. We get angry because the red light is too long, because others work too slowly, because God answers our prayers too late. This state of simmering inside is a great source of fatigue. Rest is cultivating patience, a fruit of the Spirit, learning to accept the rhythm of life and to trust God's timing. Jesus, in the parable of the weeds, taught a profound lesson about patience. The servants wanted to go and pull up the weeds immediately. They were impatient. But the master said, "No, let both grow together until the harvest." He had a long-term perspective and a patience based on wisdom. The Lord teaches that the eagerness to clean up everything immediately can do more harm than good. Rest. Be patient. Trust in the final harvest. 91. Rest from the pressure to be interesting. In social relationships, we often feel a pressure to be witty, funny, or to have interesting stories to tell. The burden of having to perform prevents us from truly connecting with others. Rest is when we can be with someone and be completely ourselves, whether boring or silent, and still be accepted. When Jesus came to the house of Mary and Martha, Mary did not try to impress him. She didn't recount her achievements or ask clever questions. She simply sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he said. She found rest in being allowed to simply be and to listen without the pressure to perform. Our relationship with the Lord is the same. He invites us to come, not to be entertained by us, but simply to be with us. 92. The burden of not forgiving oneself. Many people can believe that God has forgiven them, but they cannot forgive themselves. They constantly berate themselves for past mistakes. This is a burden of subtle pride, where we place our own standards above God's forgiveness. Rest is humbly accepting God's verdict on us, the verdict of acquitted, and to stop acting as judge over ourselves. After Peter denied the Lord, he surely could not forgive himself. He went back to fishing, carrying the weight of his failure. But when Jesus met him again, he didn't say, "You need to forgive yourself." Instead, he gave him a mission. Feed my sheep. By doing so, he showed Peter that, in his eyes, Peter's past did not define his future. The best way to escape the burden of not forgiving oneself is to start living in the forgiveness and purpose that God has given. 93. Rest is found in beauty. We often grow tired from being surrounded by the ugly, the mundane, and the chaotic aspects of life. Taking time to stop and contemplate beauty, a flower, a piece of music, a painting, a sunset, is not a waste of time. It is a way for the soul to rest, to be lifted above earthly cares, and to connect with the one who is the source of all beauty. Jesus frequently used the beauty of nature to teach. He said, "See how the flowers of the field grow. Not even Solomon, in all his splendor, was dressed like one of these." He is inviting us to rest by contemplating, to temporarily set aside the burdens of worry, and to take a minute to truly see the beauty that God has placed all around us. A soul that appreciates beauty is a soul at rest. 94. The burden of performance-based prayer. Many of us carry the burden of feeling our prayers are not good enough. We think God only listens to eloquent, long-winded prayers, or those performed perfectly. The pressure to perform, even in prayer, makes us weary. Rest is trusting that God hears even the most silent, simple cry of a sincere heart. In the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, the Pharisee had a very long and impressive prayer, listing all his accomplishments. But it was a heavy prayer of the ego. The tax collector, however, stood at a distance. He would not even look up to heaven, but beat his breast and said, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner." His prayer was short and simple, but it came from a broken heart. And Jesus said it was this man who went home justified. Rest comes when we stop trying to impress God and start being real with Him. 95. Rest is escaping the echo chamber of the self. We often get stuck in an echo chamber of our own negative thoughts. One anxious thought leads to another, and then another, creating an endless, exhausting loop. Come to me is the act of stepping out of that room, allowing a new voice, the voice of God's truth, hope, and love, to break in and shatter the negative loop. After the disciples failed to cast a demon out of a boy, they came to Jesus privately and asked, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" They were in the echo chamber of their own failure and self-doubt. Jesus didn't focus on their failure. He introduced them to a new voice, a new reality. Everything is possible for one who believes. He was inviting them to step out of their analysis of failure and into the realm of God's power. Rest is allowing another voice to have more authority than the voice of fear inside us. 96. The burden of ungratefulness. An ungrateful heart is never content. It always looks at what it doesn't have, and therefore it is always in a state of restlessness and fatigue. Ungratefulness is a burden that makes the soul barren. Conversely, gratitude is the fertile soil where peace and joy can grow. Rest is found in the deep contentment of a heart that knows how to say thank you. As mentioned in the story of the 10 lepers, only the one who returned to give thanks received complete salvation. Jesus, before multiplying the loaves, performed a simple act. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke them. He began a great miracle with gratitude for the little he had. He teaches that instead of complaining about the burden of lack, begin by giving thanks. Gratitude will open the door for rest and wonders. 97. Rest is a legacy. The peace and rest that we cultivate in our own souls are not just for us. They have a ripple effect. They become a gift, a legacy that we leave to our children, our families, and those around us. A father or mother who knows how to rest in the Lord will teach their children how to face life's storms with a different posture. Lois and Eunice, the grandmother and mother of Timothy, were mentioned as women of sincere faith. That faith surely brought them an inner peace and rest, and that faith became the most precious legacy they passed down to Timothy, helping him become a steadfast leader of the early church. This shows that when we come to the Lord for rest, we are not just doing it for ourselves, we are sowing seeds of peace for future generations. 98. The burden of pretending to be happy. In many cultures, including religious ones, there is an unspoken pressure to always appear happy and positive. Having to wear a mask of happiness while one's heart is breaking is an incredibly lonely and tiring burden. True rest is finding a place safe enough to take off the mask, to be allowed to be sad, to be allowed to be weak without being judged. Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, did not pretend to be strong in front of his 3 closest disciples. He said plainly, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." He showed complete honesty about his anguish. He did not carry the burden of having to appear as an ever-stoic teacher. In doing so, he sanctified our sorrows and invited us to bring our most authentic, unmasked grief to him and to a trusted community. 99. Rest in the finished work. The deepest foundation of rest does not lie in our efforts, not in our trying to rest, trying to surrender, or trying to trust. That foundation lies in a historical event that has already happened. The redemptive work of Jesus Christ on the cross. His final words, "It is finished," were a declaration that the hardest work to bring peace between us and God was done. The New Testament writers often speak of us being seated with Christ in the heavenly realms. The posture of sitting is the posture of rest. It contrasts with the standing posture of the Old Testament priests, who had to continually offer sacrifices because their work was never done. Our rest comes not from what we do, but from believing in what He has done. Come to me is to come and rest in the results of the work He has already completed for us. 100. Rest is a prophetic act. In a world churning with anxiety, busyness, and fear, a person who lives with deep peace and rest in God becomes a strange sign. That peace cannot be explained by the world's logic. It becomes a silent but powerful testimony to another kingdom, another reality, another king who reigns. When the disciples were in the middle of the storm, their panic was a completely normal reaction according to the world's logic. But Jesus' rest, He was sleeping, was a prophetic act. It declared that there is a power greater than the storm, a peace that is not dependent on circumstances. When we choose to rest in God in the midst of our own storms, we are also participating in that prophetic act. We are saying to the world around us, "My King is still in control." 101. The burden of uncertainty. The fear of an uncertain future is one of humanity's greatest burdens. We don't know what will happen tomorrow with our jobs, our families, our health. This uncertainty creates an underlying anxiety. Rest is placing our hand in the hand of the one who not only knows the future, but holds it. Jesus told His disciples, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me." He said this just before He was about to suffer, the moment their future looked the bleakest. He didn't give them a detailed plan of what would happen. Instead, He gave them Himself. He is the only certainty in an uncertain world. Come to me is to come and exchange the burden of uncertainty for the assurance of His presence on every step of the journey. 102. The final invitation is personal. After all the analysis and philosophy, we must return to the core, simple truth. Jesus did not say, "Come to a belief system," or "Come to a set of rules." He said, "Come to me." Rest is not a state we can achieve on our own through technique. It is a gift given in a relationship. It is not a what, but a who. All the paths, the lessons, the truths are meaningless if they do not lead us to a personal encounter, a living connection with Jesus Himself. The Apostle Paul, a man of profound intellect, summarized his entire life not by what he knew, but by who he knew. He said, "I know whom I have believed." The invitation, "Come to me," is the most intimate invitation in the universe. It is an invitation to leave behind all the burdens of having to figure it out ourselves, to fix it ourselves, and to simply step into the open arms of the one who loved us before we ever knew him. That is the beginning and the end of all rest, dear friends. And so our journey together, exploring 102 philosophies of rest from Jesus' timeless invitation, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened," comes to a close here. This has been not just a journey of knowledge, but a journey of the heart. Church Audio hopes that, through these moments of reflection, you have not only learned more about rest, but have truly felt that loving invitation being extended to you personally. Because in the end, rest is not a state, a destination, or an abstract concept, but a person, Jesus himself, who is patiently waiting for us with open arms. Now, in this moment of quiet, ask your heart, what burden is weighing on your shoulders right now, and which philosophy touched you most deeply? Please share your feelings and your story in the comments section below. Every share is a ray of light, and together we can build a community that listens and lifts each other up in faith. If this video has brought you even a little bit of peace, please give it a like and share it with those you know who are also tired and in need of comfort. That is how we can, together, become the extended arms of the Lord. And if you are new to the channel, Church Audio always welcomes you with open arms. Please hit the subscribe button and the bell icon next to it, so you won't miss any of the meaningful spiritual journeys we will send you in the future. May each and every one of you, wherever you are, whatever burden you are carrying, find true rest as you come to the Lord. Church Audio sincerely thanks you for listening and for journeying with us. The peace of the Lord be with you, and see you in the next videos, 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 in the next videos.